And I have 6:30 now, so I'm going to start the webinar.
Okay. Good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
Hey, Julio. Julio, when you're ready, I have 2 committees to call the roll for tonight.
Sure thing. Let's give it another 2 minutes at 33. Jeremy, let's go ahead and call the roll. Get us started.
Okay, I'm going to mute everyone. Good evening, everybody. This is a joint committee meeting between the executive and land use committees. I am going to call the roll first for the executive committee, and then for land use. You may be on both committees, so I may call your name twice. Please answer affirmatively both times. When I call your name, please unmute yourself, answer affirmatively, and then mute yourself again. Let's start with Julio Pena.
Present.
Thank you. Cindy Vanden Bosch. Pat Ruiz. Karen Rolnick.
Present.
Thank you. John DeLupa. Cynthia Felix.
Present.
Thank you. Cesar Zuniga. Victor Swinton. Sam Sierra. Moving on to land use. Sandra Alfonso.
Present.
Thank you. Joan Body.
Here.
Thank you. Christina Das. John Fontillis. Cynthia Gonzalez.
Present.
Thank you. Diana Gonzalez.
Present.
Thank you. Kenny Guan. Zachary Jacy. Christina Lem. Jimmy Lee. Paul Mack, Antoinette Martinez, Marilyn Melman, Gabino Morales, Daniel Murphy, Karen Rolnick.
Present.
Thank you. Damaris Santiago, Katie Walsh. Julio, roll has been called for both committees. If you are not a member of either committee, but you are a board member, I'm not calling your name, but I will write your name down.
Thank you, Jeremy. So we have one item on our agenda this evening for the joint committee meeting. It is a presentation from the Brooklyn Borough President's Office on draft recommendations for the Brooklyn Comprehensive Plan on Health Disparities in the Borough. This is something that I have mentioned specifically a couple of months ago, probably at either a previous executive committee meeting or at the larger board meeting during the chair's report. Something I'm very excited to hear about and to talk about at the upcoming board meeting and to share with folks. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to the representatives from the Borough President's Office to share more from their draft recommendations and to share their details.
Thank you, Julio, and thank you to the whole Community Board 7 and for hosting us and letting us speak to you tonight. My name is John Douglas. I'm the Director of Land Use and Topography of the Brooklyn Borough President. I'm joined by my colleagues, Aaron Buchanan, Britt Bird, who also work on the team. I won't go through the slides very quickly with you all and just sort of open it up to discussion, but wanted to follow up on a presentation that we gave at the Borough Board last year and conducted a town hall, was the existing conditions work. And so we'll have a brief summary and some of the ideas that have sort of emerged from that process. And then I want to walk through some of the thinking of how we're approaching our recommendations and how we fit that into the physical spatial realities of Brooklyn. So with that, I'll just try to go through these slides quickly. Brooklyn Comprehensive Plan, Health and Housing. Can everyone see that? Yes, okay. So just quickly, what is a comprehensive plan? This is a document that really provides guidance for community stakeholders to utilize a variety of means to implement the goals of this plan. Specifically for this one, this is really first and foremost guidance for the Brooklyn Borough President and his land use decisions and recommendations. A lot of data crunching and looking at trends and having that global perspective for Brooklyn, is supposed to inform how he makes those recommendations. Want to share critical data with all the stakeholders of Brooklyn so that we're all speaking from the same sort of ground reality. And then making sure the Borough President has accountability and predictability with his decision making for the public. So what we also want to share is what this plan is not, because there may have been some, the comprehensive plan gets thrown around a lot recently. So what this plan is not a substitute for a citywide comprehensive plan. That's something that the city council and the mayor would have to pass through legislation, or the agency itself would have to take on, the Department of City Planning. So this is not a substitute for that more citywide planning effort that the Borough President still feels should be conducted. It's not a substitute for local planning efforts that are ongoing. So there's a significant amount of community planning that preceded the Borough President taking office last year and will continue into the future. And we want to respect those planning processes. We want to highlight them, elevate the things the Borough President can and will support. This is also not complete or finished. This is literally our first presentation to the public about these draft recommendations and goals. So we're really looking for feedback. We want to stress that I'm sure there's some ideas that have been left out, and that we want to hear that feedback, and we want to make sure that we incorporate it before the final report comes out this summer. And then finally, this is not a rezoning. So it's not specifically a zoning proposal. So we're not talking about let's rezone this block from R5 to R8. It's a little bit more big picture than that, and trying to have sort of a Brooklyn-wide perspective on what the best future land use will look like. So just a brief overview of what the borough president's powers and responsibilities are. He can issue ULIP recommendations, sponsor legislation at city council. He has a budget where he can prioritize and allocate funding for his priorities. He can monitor and modify delivery of city services, convene all the stakeholders of Brooklyn to have a strategic plan for the growth of Brooklyn. So why does this comprehensive plan focus on health and housing? From the existing conditions research, we saw that there are clear, stark disparities in health outcomes as it relates to race and income. There's opportunities here the borough president feels to coalesce a future land use framework for Brooklyn with shared values that focus on improving public health outcomes. And a lot of the research that's coming out in social sciences relate to how the physical environment affects our physical and social well-being. So there's been a lot of research that shows the location of affordable housing, the availability and accessibility of public transit and public services has significant effects on basically life expectancy and all the other health conditions that come along with it. So just a little bit about the existing conditions work that was done last year. The borough president early in his term established an advisory committee for the comprehensive plan made up of over 20 groups of engaged organizations, nonprofits, city agencies, arts organizations to help guide this effort, and have really been helping us ground truth some of these with their constituents. They'll also be helping us with a train-the-trainer model, so trying to get the word out and reaching their own networks to really get more detailed feedback from the public on these recommendations. And they've helped us, been a tremendous help throughout this whole process. The borough president also held a town hall last December for giving people opportunity to speak their mind and see some of the data that have been collected. And then the borough president provided an online form for feedback in written form, which we did get a significant amount of comments and has really helped shape the existing conditions framework. Also presented to the borough board and borough service cabinet. And then as the borough president does, he meets with a lot of people. And so he's always bringing up this plan and this proposal and looking for opportunities to collaborate on it. And then Hester Street is a new partner on this project. They're really leading and spearheading our community engagement process moving forward. And they already have established a few focus groups on health and housing, infrastructure, and environmental justice to meet with some additional stakeholders to get some more intensive feedback on those issues. So that's just a little bit of summary. These are some of the pictures and news and some of the questions that the borough president had that engagement process. And out of that process, a lot of emerging goals came out and opportunities to establish a land use framework for the borough that I think distributes the recommendations that you'll see spatially. So where there's an issue related to, let's say, obesity or heart disease, where would some of these recommendations be most effective and help the most people? So we have, on the one hand, we have just a list of things that the borough president supports, recommendation goals, recommendations, and metrics for success. And then we're going to distribute those spatially across the borough based on that data from the existing conditions. So those emerging goals that we've identified are pretty simple, but we think encompass everything here. One is reducing exposure to hazardous environmental conditions, especially those exacerbated by climate change, increasing access to quality affordable housing, increase access to safe and healthy affordable housing, encourage an active living lifestyle to reduce chronic diseases, increase and support social resiliency and community services and neighborhoods with those stark health disparities, increase access to employment and support pathways for well-paying jobs, and of course, integrate accessibility in all of the physical environments that projects that are built. So we just want to do an example of this, how we're thinking about achieving those goals. Like I said, those goals will be fleshed out with objectives. some recommendations and metrics for success. So, for example, one of the ways that we think that you can reduce hazardous exposure to environmental conditions is protecting vulnerable populations from high heat. So on the right, you see a map of the high vulnerability heat index. That's folks who are very susceptible to the impacts from very hot days. So seniors, young children, people with asthma, those folks that, you know, as the heat goes up and they don't necessarily have access to AC, their existing conditions or just the nature of, you know, their physical health will be exacerbated by the heat. So there's opportunities to, you know, increase open space and increase the tree canopy and expand access to air conditioners. And the metric for success would be to reduce that heat vulnerability index in the highest, where that concentration is the highest. So you can see in East Brooklyn, community boards 3, 17, 16, and 5 are really the most impacted. So we would look at to, you know, prioritize those recommendations and implement those in the areas of the borough that are most affected by those issues. So another example is increase access to quality affordable healthcare. So removing barriers to healthcare would be an example objective. Citing new healthcare facilities in mixed-use projects that the borough president reviews during ULURP would be one recommendation that could be included. Making sure that all the DOH outreach materials, the Department of Health in New York City has outreach materials in the most spoken languages in the borough. And then, you know, the physical intervention, we think that the proposed IBX actually does increase access to some of our safety net healthcare facilities. And so that's one big project that you'll see probably throughout this process. And then, you know, one of those metrics is we make sure that folks in Brooklyn live in accessible transit distance from safety net hospitals. So we want to make sure we have the goal. We have some recommendations to put some meat on, you know, how to achieve those goals, and then a metric for success to measure our work. And finally, active living in transit is another example. You know, looking at encouraging an active lifestyle to reduce chronic illnesses. One way is to improve our pedestrian and bike network. You know, that can be achieved multiple ways, but, you know, clearly want to make sure that our bike network is doesn't have major gaps in it to basically delineate where bikers are and make sure that they have a safe environment to bike. Excuse me, it's a little loud here. And one of those metrics could be building certain miles of protected bike lanes, probably borrowing a lot from New York City's streets plan, which was passed in the last council session. So, like I said, those goals that we outlined will be achieved spatially, we think, through these 4 land use frameworks. So those 4 frameworks we've called housing growth and parking demand management, the health and wellness economy, healthy streets and environment, and the green waterfront economy. So for housing growth and parking demand, this is a map that we pulled from the existing conditions related to where most housing has been produced in Brooklyn. As you can see, the dots in yellow show the concentration and the density of housing by the size of the bubble. You can see most of, you know, North Brooklyn has done a significant amount of housing production. The underlying colors on the map show which community districts have seen the most population growth. So the darker the blue, the more concentration of population growth. And as you can see in South Brooklyn, you know, some in 7, some mostly in 12 and South, you'll see that it's less housing that's been built along those subway lines. And the blue line that runs the borough is the proposed IBX line. So the borough president thinks that there's an opportunity for growth here. And so looking at making sure that everyone is producing housing here in an equitable way. And another, you know, key principle clearly would be transit-oriented development. So encouraging housing growth within half a mile of existing and proposed mass transit network. So once again, in the blue line is the proposed IBX. The portions of the borough that are in orange are areas that, you know, for example, under a Hopeless plan would not necessarily meet the density that that they're calling for in that proposal. So we could look at areas that don't meet that target and look at how we can get density in those communities. And then with growth, clearly we need to make sure that we are being responsible with development, and that is a parking demand management strategy that we have to establish for this growth scenario. Parking demand management is based on the facts that we're not going to create any more on-street parking, and we want to make sure that folks are encouraged to use mass transit and a very convenient alternative to driving, and concentrating development along transit lines so less folks are requiring cars to get to work and back. So some of those strategies that are more, I think have been tested and tried and tested outside of the city, and we think there's opportunities here around parking cash out. That's, there's commuter benefits the federal government subsidizes for private vehicles, commuters, parking spaces. And so there's an opportunity to consider basically cashing that benefit out as money rather than the subsidy for the parking spot specifically, to encourage folks to also take transit to work. Wayfinding, so making sure folks know how to find existing off-street parking that is affordable. Park and ride is something that's more common in Staten Island, but could be applied to southern Brooklyn, where you basically drive your private vehicle half the way, park it, and then take transit for the rest of your commute. Borough President is excited about the opportunity for residential parking permits that's been floated by the Senate, and unbundling parking costs from rent, so folks know if you're paying for the parking spot or not, and that your rent isn't including that parking spot if you don't need that parking spot. And then shared parking is using parking that's allocated for residential or commercial when during certain parts of the day, and then you let a portion of those spaces be used for another use when demand is lower. So like say a shopping mall, there's no parking that's needed overnight. So is there an opportunity to lease some of that space for residential parking? Things like that is what we look at shared parking, and then reducing or eliminating minimum parking requirements and zoning, particularly around transit nodes. And then overflow parking is for large events where, Barclays, that there's a comprehensive strategy to make sure that that traffic continues to move. So the health and wellness economy is a second sort of geography we're looking at. This is really where in the dark orange where we see, one, a high concentration of people with mental health challenges or report bad days related to mental health. And it's concentrated in areas that we think are also, the disparities in life expectancy are significantly lower. We want to make sure that we're planning for our workforce that's concentrated heavily in the healthcare and education sectors, increasing active and passive open space. These areas have significant challenges related to health, but also that heat index, access to medical care, and encouraging the wellness economy. So like I said, 50% of Brooklyn residents work in healthcare and education industries. So you can see in darker the purple, the higher the concentration of education and healthcare workers. And you can see the proposed, basically all the grayed out mask on top. Those are areas that are within half a mile of transit. So you can see a significant number of folks are in areas that are in transit deserts. And this orange line is, once again, it's the proposed IBX. You would be expanding transit access for significant portions of the borough with that intervention. So healthy streets and environment. This is really concentrated along the waterfront communities and northern Brooklyn. This is really focused on creating safe streets. These in purple, you'll see Vision Zero priority areas, and in black, you'll see outlined planned or existing streetscape improvements. And so we want to are related to Vision Zero. And so we want to make sure we're prioritizing and highlighting them and making sure that those streets function better than they do today. And one thing innovatively about the public space, and because in North Brooklyn there is such a lack of opportunities for new open space, that we make sure that we're looking at creative ways to expand, ways to be able to have access to recreation in our public right-of-ways. And then also want to make sure that we're prioritizing bus lane construction and priority corridors as well. So on the map, previous map here, in the red, you can see a high concentration of the waterfront and, a little bit in East New York, that the concentration of PM 2.5, that's particulate matter that can really affect public health. It's really concentrated along the BQE. And, we think that there's, critical that we look at those areas as well. So as you can see here, basically nowhere in Brooklyn meets, really a ideal air quality related to PM 2.5, but it's particularly bad, particularly in CV7. I'm sure you all are aware of this and experience this, and primarily from BQE and other truck traffic, as well as, the industrial uses there. And there's clearly a high concentration of, industrial toxic waste sites in our industrial waterfront. So, and then you see a minimum, there's an outline of the most, the environmental justice census tracts that were established in the New York State climate bill. And so you can see some of the overlap there, North Brooklyn and CV7, related to where the concentration of air quality is particularly bad. And finally, we're looking at a green waterfront economy. So one of those features critical to making sure that we have a future, sustainable future in Brooklyn, is make sure that we, complete the Army Corps HATS project, which is basically the harbor-wide strategy to deal with sea level rise and climate change across the New York Harbor. Army Corps is leading this project. They've been doing some outreach recently, and I'm sure they'll probably reach out to you if they haven't already. It's a once-in-a-generation opportunity to protect our waterfront. There's proposed gates along significant portions of and critical, waterways in Brooklyn, including Newtown Creek, Gowanus, Coney Island. So the major, inlets. There's got to be a significant investment in, probably some form of gates, and those are oftentimes the same areas where we have Superfund designations. So we're going to really need a coordinated effort to make sure that we can get those gates built, make sure that those Superfund sites are cleaned up in a coordinated way, and also that the elevation tie-ins related to protecting our waterfront are also there. So, and that's primarily an issue on the Newtown Creek. And then we want to make sure that a significant feedback we've heard from that project is that folks are concerned about the proposed seawalls and the hard edges. And so looking at wedge design guidelines for how to create more natural interventions that deal with wave attenuation, and that don't rely so much on cement, but rely on natural features and functions to protect from sea level rise and storm surge. So clearly lots of work to do there, but overall, yes, let's try to get this, harbor-wide strategy so we can protect our communities. And then also looking at wind energy. New York City and state have a competitive advantage related to wind energy. We have a very shallow shelf off the coast of Long Island, and so the state has been leasing significant portions of that shelf for wind energy production, and the shallow shelf allows for those wind energy turbines to be anchored in the ground, which is much more affordable or much more easy to build than floating wind turbines. And so we really do have a competitive advantage, and it is a waterborne freight really industry. So we want to make sure that we're prioritizing marine transfer and rail-based freight movements to get trucks off the road, supporting that full wind energy supply chain along Brooklyn's industrial waterfront. So on the map on the right, you can see the proposed IBX line, but that also connects with 65th Street Rail Yard, where the Cross Harbor Rail Tunnel was proposed. And then you also see the offshore wind energy connected to our industrial waterfronts, the significant maritime industrial areas, and the other IBZs across the borough. But we really those are really the key sort of opportunities, we think, to make a big impact on the borough. And then, like I said, finally, I know we talk about IBX a lot, but it really does solve a lot of opportunities, and it really illustrates some of the connections that we think run through all of these issues and how physical interventions really can help solve some of these issues. And so IBX, like I said, achieves multiple health goals. There is a link between vehicles miles traveled and obesity. So there's a high concentration of obesity in East New York. You can see the darker the red, the higher the concentration, and the blue is the proposed IBX line. You can also see this same geography south of the proposed IBX. The darker orange shows higher households that utilize cars more than the communities in yellow. And as you can see, the proposed IBX line correlates almost perfectly with that boundary of where folks are relying more on cars to get to where they need. So, there's an opportunity for IBX to, one, get folks off the road, reduce car traffic, hopefully reduce their commute times, improve air quality and access to jobs. And then finally, like I said, that there's opportunities for growth along the IBX and portions of transit-oriented areas south of the park. So we want to encourage residential growth there, make sure that there's mass transit redundancy. So if any of these rail lines fails, that you have an option to get to work or wherever you need to go from multiple lines, and that critical connection between waterfront freight movement and rail freight movement. So just big picture, I know that's a lot, but we're currently, this is the community engagement plan. Like I said, Hester Street's really spearheading this effort. They've really done a lot of work on the focus groups, and now is really focused on the train the trainer sessions with our advisory council or committee for the comprehensive plan. They're going to be working on community conversations, and that includes some of these with the community boards. So we're taking that on, but they'll be doing additional ones. And then the next phase really is to, once we have received feedback from you all, from the other community boards, from the advisory committee, we'll take the advisory committee feedback, and we'll hold a town hall with basically the interim recommendations, basically right before they'll be finalized at the town hall. So for folks to get their last touch on this document before it goes public. And then we'll finalize those recommendations. We'll close the online survey and then print the report. We're really thinking critically about the implementation part of this, and want to do a scientific, peer-reviewed sort of strategy around how we can measure metrics and success. So we'll look to you all, and we'll follow up with more details on that portion. We have a digital tool that will provide opportunities. So we basically have a full list of the recommendations. We only gave you basically a handful of the objectives and recommendations that we've been looking at, but just want to make sure you understand basically how we're thinking about those issues, and that there's a full list of way more issues that we did not get to, all those goals that we didn't go over with you, and more. So please go online. We'll send you the link shortly for you all to access it and provide your comments. Like I said, we're working on the town hall for the week of May 15th. We will finalize that hopefully in the next couple of days, and we'll send you that calendar invite. And obviously welcome your attendance and encourage folks to join as well. So I know that's a lot. Happy to take questions, and thank you again for your time.
Thank you so much, Don. I'd love
Sorry,
to.
how do I stop sharing?
Oh, your screen stopped.
Oh, great, perfect. Thank you.
Good. I'd love to entertain some questions from board members. And I actually did have a couple of questions myself. One thing I'll just add a comment. One thing I particularly liked about the presentation and plan is that the heavy focus on the IBX, because I think that is a great way to multi-solve a lot of the particular challenges, and not just, obviously this district, but this borough. I think transit is a singular issue all over, and people not having access to transit makes people get into cars, which causes, can cause accidents, can cause pedestrian issues, can cause, pollution. Like there's so many things that the IBX I think can potentially solve. One thing that I particularly liked is that, and I didn't really think about, is it can also solve housing, because the density piece is something that I didn't really quite consider, and need to consider, and I think it is just interesting to see it, and also just to kind of wrap our head around, because it also that it's, we share that with board 12, and I'd be curious to hear some others, but I'm curious how would this be kind of like, when it's completed, how can this be given to a board and be like, use this as kind of like your toolkit to like if someone is proposing like a ULURP or something, and we have some kind of proposal, I'm just trying to think of like what are some ways we can use this as a blueprint or a guide in some of our decisions.
Yeah, thank you for that question and the feedback. And I think our partners on this also been the Regional Planning Association, and they've really helped us look at the IBX corridor intensely. And we've just come back and over to this project as a really elegant solution to a lot of things, or opportunity. And so looking forward to discussing what that looks like with you all. I think for communities, I think our goal is to, one, hopefully show best practices on where we want to see density. So like I said, transit-oriented development, you want to have the highest density clearly closest to the subway. Looking at growth, infrastructure within a half-mile boundary, so school, open space, hospitals, recreation, all that within that mile. And then looking at what some folks are calling gentle density now, which is basically, there's a significant amount of single family residential uses in South Brooklyn, but not single family zoning, which I think is often confused. And so, we want to look at opportunities for folks who do want to redevelop to increase housing, that there is some best practices around neighborhood topology on how to get that extra unit on their site. So, some communities have, row houses and big backyards. Is there an opportunity to add a unit in the rear yard or on top? I don't know. I'm not saying that's the answer, but that we look at design solutions that with, maybe it might be AIA or other groups that would help look at what's some best practices on getting that second unit on in those areas that are a little further away from transit, so that we're not, creating huge high rises, where there's no access to transit and everyone's driving cars. But we do want to make sure that, one, there's opportunity for homeowners to get that passive income from that second unit, provide opportunities for housing. Clearly, we're living in a housing emergency. But like I said, making sure that we're, providing that infrastructure closer to transit, and making sure that folks have all they need in their community. So I think, we'll probably reach out again about some of, like I said, that basic TOD framework. I think, probably applies somewhat to Sunset Park, but that there's a lot of recommendations related to improving air quality around, CB7's waterfront, industrial waterfront, that wind energy economy, making sure that, as projects come through ULURP, that we're looking at ways that, attract businesses from that industry to make sure that we are maintaining that competitive edge in wind energy. And then looking at, opportunities to coordinate agencies around implementing the Army Corps project. I think it's going to take all of us to make sure that project is successful. And so, any projects that sort of, hit on or touch on those areas that we're thinking critically and long-term about what that Army Corps intervention looks like before, we say we're approving something in that line of fire. So those are kind of the things we're thinking about related to that, and I'm happy to discuss more here or offline.
Thank you, John.
I'm sorry, just to add to that really quickly, just to sort of emphasize what John was saying, I think to your question about like using this in your ULIP recommendations and as a toolkit, as John mentioned, this is rooted in tons of data, and we're leaning on that to get these recommendations out there. And as your board sees fit, based on the data, we are recommending things geographically based on which areas need things like healthcare facilities, or where we see issues with school overcrowding, things like that. So we're hoping to look at the data for each community district to kind of craft these recommendations, and then use those to base our own ULIP recommendations on. So that's how we're planning on using it, and think the boards could use it in a similar way, just kind of having this data-driven approach based on the community's needs and how those ULIP applications can help satisfy those needs.
Thank you for that. So we have some questions from Cynthia, John Fontillis, and then Diana.
Yes, hi. I want to start out by saying that, we live in a very attractive community because we have our commercial corridor, we have our industrial area, we have a great hospital, we have a lot of great things going on. But we also have like a lot of overcrowding, because there's more people than housing can support. So we do, witness that people are doubled and tripled up in apartments and stuff. And the landlords make modifications for those without going to the buildings department and what have you. So that is a problem. A problem related to that is that this community does not have like a lot of property that's available. So, getting a school into the community, that process takes forever, because unless we go to eminent domain, there's really no place to put a school. If there's no place to put a school, then there's no place to put housing for all of these people that live here. So I don't know how the borough president is going to address the fact that in order to provide more housing, there has to be a place to put the housing. And this is one of our biggest issues. The second thing is, of course, the traffic and there's in some single family homes, like 3 people own a car. Okay, so there's no place to park your car here unless you have a private parking spot. And then this also impacts the commercial zone, because in our community, you see what you rarely see in other communities, which is literally hundreds and hundreds of street vendors that take up the sidewalk. They're on the sidewalk, and because there's a lot of street vendors on the sidewalk, these vendors will come and they will park their cars in the meter and be there all day until they go home. So this is impacting our commercial strip, because people who have to drive to get here, to shop here, there's no place for them to park, because all of the parking spots have been taken up by either city bikes or those outside off the curb, restaurant shacks, which I call them, which a lot of them are so underutilized. It's really ridiculous to take up all of that space, where people coming to shop can park their cars because they have all of these shacks. So we live in a situation where it's a disaster. It's a complete disaster for anybody coming in here to do either business or drop their kids off to school or whatever. There's just no place to put housing, and there's no place to park so you can shop in this community. So how does the borough president address these problems? Because I know that you mentioned earlier in your presentation that you have communities where, you know, they're, I guess you call them traffic deserts, because people have to use their cars, because in those communities, you know, they're, how should I say, they have no choices. They're not close to transit. However, those people, they don't seem to have maybe the parking issues because there's low density housing and stuff like that. Now, our 4th Avenue corridor, every day I see a new, you know, high-rise building going up, you know. So we're getting more density, but we're not getting any like on-site parking for these places. You know, it's a real problem, especially if you're a senior citizen. You know, when you're a senior citizen, sometimes you don't want to be standing outside for a half an hour waiting for the bus. You know, if you have a car, you're going to take it at the risk of losing your parking spot, obviously, because nobody that has a car here wants to move it, because when you come back, where are you going to put it? On your head? I live in an apartment. I can't bring it up to my house.
No, I hear you. I used to live in Park Slope when I had a car in New York, and I would spend 3 hours circling the neighborhood, and I still wouldn't find a spot, and I'd have to drive it down to like Gowanus and park it there.
I did that for years, and I'm a senior. You know, I don't want to park my car on 4th Avenue and walk, you know, 4 avenues up to go home, you know, late at night. That's not really a safety issue. So it's really a big problem for just about everybody. But if you're a senior person or you're a disabled person that, you know, you have your disabled parking permit, that does you no good if there's no parking.
No, I absolutely. And I think
so I wanted to hear about the parking permits, the street. How is that going to be done in a community like Sunset Park? You know, because I'll tell you, I will be one of those first applicants for a street parking, because I pay ridiculous amounts of money to have a parking spots, you know, private parking.
Right. Okay. Well, I think it's good to hear that you all support, or you support, residential parking permits. I think that is a really, at least a way to show, you know, folks who actually live in the city are having the first crack at access to those parking spots. And so we hope that'll rationalize some of the
But in a community like ours, how would that be implemented? Like, you know,
I
there's more cars than people.
I see. Yeah, I think we'd have to work at the details. I think DC has residential parking permits. I think Portland does as well. So there's probably best practices around there. Clearly, you know, there'll have to be some sort of enabling legislation, whether that's the city or the state. I think it's, you know, dependent, but how you implement it. But the idea generally is that if you live in New York, you're a resident, you would be able to purchase a parking spot on the street. And so I think in DC, like, you can use a phone app to do it, and you just, you know, and you have your
they have them in Jersey too.
Right,
but like in our community is so densely populated that you would literally have to build a large municipal parking building and then give us the permits for that spot.
Yeah, and I think there's a conversation about, you know, off-street parking and how we encourage folks to get their cars on street. And like I said, one of the ways is, you know, wayfinding, which I know it sounds like not a really big one, but a lot of folks, you know, they don't know where existing off-street parking exists, and that and that some property owners don't know that you can use your parking space as, you know, to rent it out if you want. So I think there's a lot of off-street parking that's underutilized, and we would like to have some more facts and figures around that in coordination with some of the agencies. But we certainly think there is existing capacity. not enough, like you said, but certainly some, and that there's opportunities to find it easier. And then, as you said, we need to find a way to make off-street more attractive, and so that means maybe adequately pricing on-street parking as well. So in metered areas. So
And about
there's no one solution for every community, like you said.
But how is the borough president going to get space for housing in our district in Community Board 7? Like, has a study been done on what actually can be available, what the borough president can possibly get that a developer cannot?
Yeah, I think, and I know that there has been some more local planning. I know you have a 197A plan, and then you've also been doing your own planning efforts, local efforts around where you think growth and other, amenities can be cited around your community. And we don't want to take away from that. We want to actually encourage that. And we want to be a resource for your community. We think that density is more appropriate closer to transit, and that there's multiple benefits, that with the recently passed zoning for accessibility, making sure that development near transit nodes and subways, that MTA is the first crack at making those elevator accessible stations. So looking at if there is a large development, let's say somewhere along transit in the community, that we're looking at putting a school on the ground floor. How do we get that private developer to work with SCA to get that school on the ground floor? If there's a library missing, how do we, get some of that included? And that we look at areas that, we think that makes sense for your community, but also help achieve some of those goals, multi-layered goals around providing benefits to the community, but also providing more housing for folks who, like you said, are probably living in substandard housing conditions. I think there is an opportunity to look at the base campaign, look at opportunities for legalizing some of those spaces that may be less formal, to make sure that people aren't kicked out of their housing, but that it is safe and that we do account properly for who's living there. So I think there's a lot of strategies, and we certainly want to work with Community Board 7 closely to achieve those goals.
Thank you so very much. And thank you for coming.
Thank you for the questions.
John Fontillis, and then Diana.
Thanks, Julio. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Hi, John longtime board member. Just wanted to check because CB7 is not unfamiliar with planning. It has been actually doing quite a bit of it over the past 10 years. I would say, though, that former borough presidents, it's been difficult to be aligned with our needs versus what the borough president's office is looking for, obviously with a much bigger purview of the whole borough per se. But I think the real issue is that we have been doing internal studies here at CB7. We've partnered with many academic institutions, say Hunter, the Wagner program at NYU. We also have been working with Langone, NYU Langone, on a community characteristics and needs assessment that has been delving in particular on health outcomes across broad ranges of the community, and tracking some interesting things related to either fertility rates or birth weight related to poverty characteristics. So I think we've got a lot of data ourselves that is more in particular related to our own community. I guess my overall question is, at the end of the day, as you said earlier, that yes, we can use your data, blend it with our data, and make our own decisions relative to land use decisions in ULURP. But how does it work when we send it up the chain to your office, to the borough president? What is the process? How does the borough president understand what we have or our concerns are? How is that taking an advantage into your phase of review, being the next phase of review of the ULURP action, or better yet, how do our inputs relate to overall planning efforts in the borough? To be quite honest, the previous borough president, I wish he would move on to a higher office. I guess maybe we see a little bit more impact, but we haven't seen a lot of on the ground benefits for all the work that we've been doing in planning as the process moves on beyond the community board to other levels of government. So I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit about how is this data going to be used going forward in your own decision making in your office? Absolutely.
Thank you for that question. And like I said, I'm very familiar with a lot of the work that your board has done over the past, and the strong organizations that make up the board. And you've had your fair share of fights. I'm not going to say the I word, but I understand that you've felt it, pressure, and you guys are experiencing pressure, and like I said, I think the borough president is keen on working with you all. He like I say, he supports ongoing planning efforts that you all have done, and if that local data that you do have from NYU, we would love to speak with you and talk with you about that. We base a lot of that health data based on the CDC 500 cities health survey. So any more local context, granular context, we'd love to have it. Like I said, we'd love your detailed comments on the recommendations. Like I said, we'll send you that link. And so we want you all to, fill in those gaps. And if there is specific CB7 issues that you find related to those recommendations, we'd love to have those. I'd also say that, citywide statement of needs statements are due, I think, today. But for us, that is the official way that we would get some of the community board's feedback on facilities and other issues that they need. And I would love to sit down with you all. I think Carol Ann has been doing that, but want to make sure that as ULURP occurs, that we're thinking critically about any other school capacity issues in this area. If a big ULURP project came down, how we could work together to bring SCA and the developer to the table, or if it's a city site, just the city and other agencies together to think critically about those issues. So we're happy to sit down and look at the detailed information you all have and line it up. I'd also say that there is some new leadership over at Brooklyn Department of City Planning, and we're excited to work with them on their future plans. And as you speak with them and they have some pre-app, pipeline coming down, feel free to reach out to our office. Let us know if there are challenging projects, and we're happy to sit down, think through it, if there is a solution, and how we can be best advocates for your community to get some of those, I think, completely understandable community needs that need to be met. Aaron, I don't know if you have any other thoughts on that.
Well, if I just may, the ULURP process is obviously like a really ham-fisted way to plan. I mean, it's like the worst thing that you can do for planning, because it's reactive, and you end up using a nuclear missile to do more fine-tuning in neighborhood development. But back in the old days, going all the way back to the Lindsay administration, there were significant borough planning initiatives, and out of that became the community planning districts, which became the community board. So, I mean, I guess I would just advocate that perhaps the borough president could take a more active view rather than reactive view, and truly engage not just in data gathering, but really working with each one of the boards to do the business of planning the way it should, where we anticipate issues, that we are forward looking, that we aren't just trying to solve problems, but really trying to set forth a vision of how each one of the community boards and districts can evolve into the future.
Yeah, I think that's a spot on. That I think values, the word you use, I think is really critical. And I think top of the line, we want to try to find some commonality on those values about what we're trying to achieve. And like I said, we would love to have your feedback on this, our framework here. But like I said, also want to work directly with you all to do exactly what you just said. And I'm happy to sit with you, and would love to sit down with DCP and bring their resources to figuring out a long-term strategy there too. And clearly working with council to make sure that that the city agencies are listening. So, but I hear you.
If you can solve that, that will be you can solve world hunger right after.
Okay, all right, we all get a key to the city.
Good enough. Thank you.
Thanks.
Diana Gonzalez and then John DeLuper.
Yeah. So my first question is I saw you use the phrase comprehensive plan. I also saw the phrase framework. So I'm slightly confused about what exactly this thing is. And so my question to you is there going to be an environmental impact study on whatever document you're going to create?
So no, there will not be an environmental review document for this.
So this is more of a framework then?
Yeah, it's not a zoning proposal.
Got it. Okay. So my next question is, you seem to want to have a push towards increased housing density, which I get it. We don't have enough housing. We certainly don't have enough affordable housing. Have you looked at this from the angle of the existing electrical grid and its capacity to withstand new development, given the fact that every summer we have brownouts disproportionately in communities that have a high heat index? And the other concern there is then peaker plants, which is an issue specific, in particular to Sunset Park. So are we ensuring that any new development isn't gonna basically pollute this community more?
I mean, that's a great comment. Thank you for that and question. I think we would do have those things in mind as we're thinking about these issues. Getting folks off fossil fuels, I think, is a shared citywide goal. I think there's opportunities to support fully electric, zero emission, new construction. I think that is part of what the City of Yes is trying to achieve. And so I think there is some opportunity there to actually make a meaningful impact on the grid. I think there's some larger issues around energy distribution that I'm not 100% up on related to Public Service Commission and how they're trying to deal with microgrids and all that kind of thing. But certainly want to make sure that I don't even know if we have a data source, but I'll check with the team on where brownouts occur or blackouts and how often, how widespread, and how we can think in terms of accessible data that we can sort of use as a metric. I think peaker plants is a good one. I think Environmental Justice Alliance may have some resources for us on that. But I do know that they just, so I think there's advocacy that we can do around that. I think there's, like I said, City of Yes, some additional battery storage they're supporting additional on-site battery storage, solar and wind energy on site. I think microgrids would be great to support. I just think it's that one is to me has been very complicated, and I think it has something to do with the right of way and the fact you can't distribute power across a right of way between two private sites. So anyway, that's a big hold to do. But
yeah, and I would also point out that with buildings kind of electrifying more stuff, that does ultimately put more strain on the electrical grid, right? The converting from gas stoves to electric stove, also all of that kind of stuff could actually mean a greater strain in the summertime. And so I would be interested in seeing recommendations that couple new development with things like solar and wind-based battery storage to ensure that that additional strain on the electrical grid is at the very least met, if not, surpassed, because that is an issue for us. And in terms of the peaker plants, just so you know, they did issue an RFP last August for, battery powered conversion, but that it's still a problem. So we definitely don't want to see more of that happening.
The borough president shares that goal. So
Right. I just wanted to bring it up and tie it together because this is a district that, you know, a lot of our health concerns are environmental concerns.
Yep.
So yeah, and then I thought what Cynthia said about the struggle of building new housing is an interesting point because we do have a lot of lot sizes that are small and that are in many cases now very high value real estate, and they're high value as they are. And so I'm interested in understanding, you know, it's easy to say like, oh, there should be more density here because there's a train stop. But like, is it actually going to happen? If I'm a real estate developer, do I want to buy a $2 million house and then raise it and build a 5-story apartment building? Probably not. So I'm interested in kind of seeing a sort of a practical approach to where it's most realistic.
Sure.
Because yeah, if you tell me that you wanna build affordable housing at like on the condos across the street that sell for $750,000, I'm gonna say that's nice, happy to rezone it for you, but it's not gonna change anything. So I'm interested in that as well. And then overall, I feel like in your presentation, I saw a lot of description of what's wrong, but then the sort of what's proposed as a solution seemed like vague to me. So I'm wondering if it's like more in depth or more in detail anywhere. I've already looked through your condition study, which is delightfully thorough and full of maps, and I just love visual aids. But is there anything kind of comparable for what's next?
Yeah, so like I said, the final report will be out in May, and so we'll do the updates to the existing conditions from the public feedback that we've received. So those maps will be a slightly different, a little bit more, let's see, streamlined. And then the recommendation section will work through those 4 frameworks to show where we think recommendations how they'll be most effective and which locations. So like I said, we'll send you that link to the draft recommendations that, like I said, we want to have clear goals, objectives, and metrics. So that we want to use those metrics based on the existing conditions data that we've used, primarily related to health, but, you know, we'll talk about, you know, places that have high bicycle and pedestrian crashes, look at best practices on how to, you know, make sure that people have safe access to, you know, for roadways, for example, or where the communities that do have like high obesity or diabetes rates, that we're focusing fresh or grocery store development in those areas for affordable foods or farmers markets, things like that. So we're trying to keep it specific, related specifically also to the metrics, and that we're having something that's measurable that we can use. So I think that is kind of how we're thinking about it. So there will be updated maps and data related to the existing conditions, some analytical maps and data that we think help form the goals, objectives, and land use framework. And then we'll have, like I said, those areas where we think the most impact from those recommendations will be made spatially in the borough.
Okay. And then you also seem to be proudly supporting the IBX. This, of course, is not really something that's under the city's jurisdiction. So it seems like you guys are willing to like stick your necks out and advocate on state issues, in which case, you know, the BQE and the Prospect Expressway in our district are controlled by the state, and they're an enormous problem. And, you know, the BQE in Sunset Park is tied to an enormous amount of truck traffic, including last mile traffic, which last mile facilities are fully unregulated. These add enormously to pollution. And then, you know, even in Windsor Terrace, this, you know, according to the map, is an area where it doesn't have problems with asthma. But I think if you looked a little more localized, it might get a little more interesting. We have a lot of schools that are adjacent to the Prospect Expressway. And this is basically the only place we can find land to put more schools is next to highways. So, you know, what are we doing to our kids? So I'd be interested in seeing much better ideas around keeping truck traffic under control in particular, and taking trucks off the road as much as possible as a part of this.
Absolutely.
cool.
Yeah. No, I think
Or also just telling the DOT to come and listen to us once in a while would be like really nice.
state
Just that,
DOT.
yes. The city DOT will talk to us. The state DOT is much more of a challenge to get them to visit. Yeah. Let's see, Jeremy, his hit or miss is hit or miss.
No, I totally hear you around those air quality issues, and you know, I don't think, honestly, frankly, that you're not the only ones that are dealing with that one, but it's a problem nonetheless. So I think we share that concern. What was the last piece you said? Just totally forgot it.
Rules? Or what?
Aaron, what? I was thinking of something.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I have one final thing. I'm wondering if since there's such a need for affordable housing, if there's going to be any kind of proposal for new zoning language of creating a form of zoning that's mandatory, inclusionary, affordable housing, or if we're just kind of going to roll with the definitions that already exist.
Yeah, that's a good point. At this point, I think we're still looking at MIH. You know, I think we could talk about which options to support and where. I think the deep affordability option, while not required, is, you know, still possible. I think it's also challenging with the suspension of 421A. In reality or not, developers are throwing their hands up saying we can't build here. So I would say it's a little bit up in the air from the state perspective, and I think it does affect our ability to regulate around MIH locally. But we certainly want to support fully 100% affordable housing projects. I think the borough president is willing to stand up for some of those projects that may not make it, and find opportunities to, you know, achieve those goals for a future action. And so we're looking at some of those zoning solutions, I think, and that some of the programs that we would support in terms of subsidy or anything like that would all be 100% affordable projects. So I guess that there's opportunities for the borough president to speed up his public review of some of those 100% affordable projects so that there's less delay on delivering them. So there's a few options there, but happy to talk about any changes to MIH that you think you know, would make sense. And I think in general, I think the borough president supports making sure that we have access for housing for those who least can afford it. I know fully affordable housing projects have a 30% sort of set aside for formerly homeless. So those are HPD sponsored projects. So I know HPD is taking an aggressive stance on that in the last few years. And so if there's opportunities where we do see, you know, if your community sees opportunities for 100% affordable, you know, that we can maximize, especially that land, because we want that 100% affordable. But we also want to make sure that we can solve multiple problems with those sites as well.
Sure. I would counter with, you know, developers are perfectly good at whenever they want to build outside of the existing zoning of going through ULURP, and kind of creating the zoning that we want sort of changes where the negotiation starts from. Right. So I would be interested in seeing proposals that recommend sort of like broad application of MIH to use that as a negotiating point.
Yeah, I think special districts are provide a lot of opportunity to make a
maybe we're not that special though. Maybe we just want to be like regular and affordable.
Sure. I'm just saying that in absence of a full citywide effort, maybe
then you have to go and like create all of the definitions. Like creating a special district is a lot. I mean, we can do it. We're CB7, but do we have to?
I'm just saying if like there's an opportunity to solve multiple things through the zoning that's at a special district level, and so, you know,
including world hunger.
I wish.
Sure. All right. Those are all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. John DeLuper.
Thank you. One of the things you mentioned earlier on was the desire of the borough president to better connect the hospitals in this borough through public transit. And I know you mentioned the buses. In this community, I know the MTA with their current redesign has proposed adding service on the B64 to connect this hospital down to Coney Island and that hospital. And I know that there have been some other changes related to that going on as well. Are you guys involved in that bus redesign process in any way, or are you, how are you involved in these transit decisions with the MTA? I know you also mentioned the IBX, and obviously that project requires design with the MTA too.
As it was. Yeah, so I think that was previous person's question as well around IBX, and I think that that will require coordination between state, the private rail operators, and the city. Like I said, I think the borough president is willing to be an advocate on this project and work with the state to see it through, because I think it achieves so many of the underlying goals and recommendations related to this. So yes, I think we want to support that and find ways to connect folks through that. The bus redesign is clearly, they've been doing them around the city. I think they've done Queens. I think they've done the Bronx and Staten Island. And, I think those efforts have been or extensive and, involved a lot of community feedback. So I think DOT does have some experience with dealing with this big of a change. And I think just big picture, my reflections on it from the previous efforts is that they were very willing to make changes after their proposal that reflect, your lived experience. The borough president, for our office, for my position, we get a lot of comments related to the bus redesign. I think we would like to have a comprehensive sort of feedback from the folks at the borough level. So I'm looking forward to DOT giving an update from to us about what feedback they got and how they think it would change their proposed network. I don't think that they're quite there yet, but the borough president certainly engaged and aware that it's a big change, and some of those proposals are not popular, and want to hear from the folks who actually ride those buses, how they actually utilize them. Does this plan help them get to where they need to go, or is it just cost saving endeavor? So would love to hear your feedback if you have any specifically related to that issue, and the board in general, if they have specific feedback that you'd like us to elevate. Happy to do that too.
Thank you.
Thank you. And our last question from Joan Body.
Oh, I think you're muted, Joan.
Joan, you're muted.
Sorry about that.
Okay, we can hear you.
Assuming that you do find space to build houses, there is nowhere in your plan for schools for children. And right now, the requirements are each classroom can only hold 25 children. We have immigrants that are housed right now in our hotels. So why does the borough president not include schools also in his plan? Because you're going to house people, and you're going to house families, and where do the children go to school?
It's a great question. I think we get that question a lot, and it's a valid and reasonable question, and for all the reasons you just said.
Our board has done, I'm sorry to interrupt, but our board has done a fabulous job since Sunset Park High School was built. Building schools, converting abandoned factories, churches to schools. But now, as Cynthia said, we run out of space for everything. And Third Avenue, the the parents of our children, they don't want their children to cross Third Avenue. I wouldn't want my son to cross Third Avenue either when he was growing up.
Yeah, and I think that's the experience that SCA has sort of relayed to me previously, is that folks, you know, they don't want to cross a really dangerous highway to get their kids to school, and so that also limits, you know, something that you can't necessarily see it on a map, but you can see that there is a barrier there that from the traffic. So it limits the available space for schools and for housing. So I think, you know, it's a point well taken. I think we will have to work closely with SCA on making sure that we get all the schools cited. I think they budgeted for schools in Sunset Park. And so, like I was saying, I think, you know, if there is a development opportunity, we want to be at the table to make sure that your priorities, and, you know, one of those priorities sounds like schools. And I think the SCA would agree with you that you need more schools, that we prioritize, you know, getting some educational facility space into new construction, that, if any, and then, you know, find the opportunities if there's not necessarily a safe way to access those sites now, if there is some comprehensive street redesign that may improve access and make it feel more safe to access more of the borough, so you can unlock more opportunities for schools. We do have those, a list of more recommendations and more data related to schools in the report that we'll issue. But it's a point well taken, and we can't expect communities to grow without the required infrastructure. And so we certainly want to elevate those concerns. And as development comes and opportunities arise, please reach out to us, and we want to advocate for new schools just as much as you do. So happy to do that.
One last question.
Sure.
Have you driven in this town lately?
I have. It's
Oh,
I drove on that Atlantic. It was a mess.
Then I say to everybody, if you can drive in this town, you can drive anywhere in the world.
That is absolutely true. Except for Arizona. I'll tell you this much. Arizona, they like to speed.
Very interesting.
But thank you for the comments. And we definitely want to work with you on those issues. And so please let us know.
Double park, triple park.
Yep, we need automatic enforcement. We want to make sure that folks
drive in the lane with the traffic heading in your direction.
We want to make sure there's loading zones for commercial parking. And yep, absolutely.
Thank you, Joan. Seeing as there are no other questions, I'd like to very much thank our presenters this evening. It was a very informative discussion and framework, and we're very much looking forward to find the final information for the town hall, so we can share with our board members and learn more on the final details. And
I just put my contact information in the chat, so if you guys want to chat with me, and we can make sure we get your ideas and the recommendations.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Seeing as there's no other items on the agenda, the Joint Executive and Land Use Committee meeting is standing adjourned.
Good night, everybody.
Enjoy your evening.
Good night. Good night.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.